This is a heartwarming story of an unexpected bond between a lonely millionaire and a struggling young mother. Comment below where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the heart of the city, inside an upscale restaurant where polished floors reflected chandeliers and every guest was dressed to impress, sat a man who didn't seem to notice any of it. Charles Whitmore, in his early 60s, wore a perfectly tailored suit, the kind that said, "money," without a single word. But his expression, cold and distant, was more suited for a funeral than a Friday night dinner. His table was set for 3, yet he sat alone. Across the table, 2 empty chairs remained untouched, just like they had for the past 10 years. Waiters knew better than to ask questions. They served his steak exactly how he liked it, medium rare, and left him in silence. Every Friday at 7 p.m., he came to this table, ordered the same meal, and ate quietly, alone. His assistant had long ago stopped trying to convince him to dine somewhere else. This was the table where he had celebrated birthdays with his wife and son. Until the accident, a car crash had taken them both in a single blink. Since then, Charles had clung to this one ritual, the only thread tying him to the people he had lost. But tonight, something was different. Just as the waiter brought out his dessert, a rich, golden crème brûlée, he noticed movement near the entrance. A young woman, hesitant and clearly out of place in the glittering room, stepped in. Her clothes were clean but worn. A faded coat covered her slender frame, and in her arms, she held a bundled baby, wrapped tightly against the cool evening air. Her eyes scanned the room, not in awe, but with purpose. She wasn't there to admire the chandeliers or taste the cuisine. She was looking for food. A hush fell over nearby tables as she approached. The maitre d' started toward her, already shaking his head, but before he could speak, she raised a hand and turned toward Charles's table. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I don't mean to bother anyone. I saw your plate. If you're finished, may I have your leftovers?" "Sir?" It was so quiet you could hear the clink of silverware from the other side of the room. Charles looked up slowly. He hadn't spoken to anyone during these dinners in years. And yet here was this girl, barely 20. He guessed, asking not for money, but for scraps. He didn't speak at first. He studied her, her tired eyes, the way she held the child protectively. The baby stirred, and she adjusted the blanket with careful hands. There was a gentleness in her movements that caught him off guard. "Sit," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. The maitre d' looked alarmed. "Mr. Whitmore, I can have her escorted." "I said let her sit," Charles repeated. The woman hesitated, unsure if this was a trap or kindness. She finally lowered herself into the chair, her eyes never leaving his. He pushed his plate toward her. It was nearly untouched. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lena," she replied, unwrapping a spoon from her bag and gently feeding her baby mashed potatoes from the side of the plate. "This is Caleb." Charles watched the baby's mouth curl into a tiny smile after each bite. It wasn't just hunger that filled the boy, it was joy. Something shifted in Charles then. He couldn't name it, but it settled deep in his chest like a memory resurfacing. "You shouldn't be feeding a baby restaurant food," he said flatly. "It's all I have today," she replied. Silence again. After a long pause, he waved over a waiter. "Bring something for the baby. Soft, warm, and a glass of water for the lady." The waiter looked unsure, but obeyed. Lena's eyes welled with tears. "You don't have to do this." Charles said nothing. He simply watched as Caleb grabbed at his mother's sleeve and giggled. He wasn't sure what compelled him to ask, but the words came anyway. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" Lena hesitated. "A car. It doesn't run. I sleep there with Caleb." Charles nodded slowly. He didn't offer pity, just understanding. When the waiter returned with a bowl of warm oatmeal, Lena thanked him and began feeding Caleb more slowly. The baby's eyes fluttered with sleep after a few bites. Charles stood suddenly. He dropped a crisp bill on the table. "Come with me." Lena looked startled. "What?" "I'm not taking you home," he said, "but I'll get you a hotel for the night. And some proper baby food." She bit her lip. "Why are you helping me?" Charles paused. "I don't know." And he didn't. Not really. They walked out together, under the city lights. People stared, but Charles ignored them. He hailed a cab, told the driver the name of a modest hotel, and handed Lena a card. "This has my number. If you need help, real help." She clutched it in one hand, the baby in the other. "Thank you," she whispered. Charles nodded once and watched the cab disappear down the street. He returned to his table alone. But something about the night felt less empty than before. The next morning, Charles Whitmore sat in his study, swirling a cup of untouched coffee. The sun had just risen, casting golden light through tall windows and across shelves of leather-bound books that hadn't been opened in years. His housekeeper, Miriam, peeked in, surprised to see him awake so early. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked gently. He looked up, clearing his throat. "Get me the number for the Rosemont Hotel, and send someone to buy formula and diapers, size small. Whatever a baby that age uses." Miriam blinked but nodded. "Yes, sir." Charles hadn't slept much. All night, he kept seeing Lena's eyes, tired but strong, and the way Caleb's tiny fingers wrapped around her shirt. He'd meant to walk away after that brief act of kindness. But something about that girl, she reminded him of someone. His wife, Meredith, used to say that motherhood was a kind of quiet bravery. Lena had that same quiet fire in her, unshakable, even in exhaustion. By 10 a.m., Charles had called the hotel and learned that Lena had checked out. Paid in full, no trace left behind. He wasn't surprised. She struck him as someone used to disappearing before she got too comfortable. But then, 2 days later, she called. It was mid-afternoon when his phone buzzed. The name on the screen read only, "Unknown." He nearly let it go to voicemail, but something told him to answer. "Mr. Whitmore?" Her voice was cautious. "Lena," he said simply. "I hope this isn't too much. I found the card in my coat pocket. I wanted to thank you for the hotel and the food." Caleb slept for 10 hours straight that night. Charles chuckled quietly. "I'm glad. You both needed it." There was a long pause on the line. "I didn't call to ask for anything," Lena said quickly. "I just wanted you to know it meant something. I've had a lot of people look the other way when they saw me." "I didn't see you as a problem," Charles said. "I saw a mother." Another pause. Then, "We're at West Park most afternoons. There's a community kitchen nearby. Caleb likes the ducks." He understood the unspoken message. If he wanted to see them again, he could. The next day, Charles stood at the edge of West Park, feeling absurd in his tailored suit among children, dogs, and joggers. He found her near the pond, Caleb in a stroller, chewing on a soft toy. "You came," she said. "I did." Lena offered a small smile. "He remembers you." Charles knelt slightly and looked into Caleb's wide eyes. The boy gurgled and reached toward his tie. "I didn't know you wore ties to the park," Lena teased. "I don't know how to dress for ducks." She laughed, and it startled both of them. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh. It was soft and unguarded, like she had briefly forgotten the weight she carried. They sat on a bench while Caleb babbled and threw bits of bread to the ducks. The conversation came slowly, like two people rediscovering how to talk. "I used to come here with my son," Charles said after a while. "James. He loved the water." Lena turned to him. "I'm sorry. You lost him?" Charles nodded. 10 years ago. Him and my wife. I can't imagine." She said. "You can," he replied. "You're a mother, you know." The breeze carried silence between them. And then Lena began to speak. "I was 19 when I got pregnant. My boyfriend left before I could tell him. My parents said I ruined my life. I thought I had, too, for a long time." She looked down at Caleb. "Then he was born, and suddenly everything had a reason. Even the hurt." Charles watched her with a kind of quiet reverence. She wasn't just surviving. She was standing tall in a storm most people would never understand. They stayed in the park for nearly an hour. When Lena got up to leave, Charles hesitated. "Let me take you two to lunch," he offered. She smiled, but shook her head. "Maybe another time. Caleb needs his nap." Charles nodded, understanding. As she walked away, Caleb turned in the stroller and waved a chubby hand toward him. Something clenched in Charles's chest. That night, he opened an old photo album he hadn't touched in a decade. James in his pajamas, Meredith laughing over birthday candles. He touched the edge of the page and whispered, "You'd have liked them." Over the next 2 weeks, Charles made it a habit. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, he met Lena and Caleb in the park. They fed ducks, shared sandwiches, and slowly wove pieces of their lives together. He bought a collapsible stroller for himself, just so he could walk Caleb when Lena needed a break. They joked that he was the world's most overdressed babysitter. One afternoon, as Lena changed Caleb on a blanket, she looked at Charles and asked, "Why are you really doing this?" He shrugged. "Because for the first time in years, I feel something when I'm around you too." "Guilt?" she teased. "Hope," he said seriously. She didn't reply right away. Then she whispered, "You saved me that night. Not just with food, but with kindness. I don't think I'd ever been seen like that before." Charles reached for Caleb, who immediately reached back. The boy nestled against his chest like he belonged there. "I didn't save you, Lena," Charles murmured. "You might be saving me." That weekend, a storm rolled in, thunder, wind, and rain like sheets. Charles waited at the park, umbrella in hand, but Lena didn't come. He waited the next day too. Nothing. By Sunday, his concern overwhelmed his hesitation. He drove to the last place she'd mentioned, the community center near 8th and Park. A volunteer recognized the name. "Lena?" She left in a hurry. The woman said, "Something about the baby getting sick." Charles felt his heart drop. "Do you know where she went?" "No, sorry. She doesn't have a phone. She stays in that beat-up blue station wagon near the old warehouse most nights." Without another word, Charles ran to his car and took off through the rain. He found the car just before dusk, parked under a flickering street lamp, one window fogged with steam from the inside. He knocked gently. The door cracked open. Lena's face was pale and streaked with tears. "Caleb's burning up," she said. "I didn't know who else to call." Charles didn't wait. "Get in. We're going to the hospital." She bundled Caleb tightly and climbed into his car. Charles sped through the city, tires skidding on wet pavement, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. In the backseat, Lena whispered to Caleb, trying to soothe him. "I've got you," Charles said, not just to her, but to the child, and to something in himself that had been sleeping for far too long. As the hospital lights came into view, Charles realized something. He didn't want to lose them. Not now, not ever. The fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed quietly above them. Lena paced the hallway barefoot, clutching her coat tightly around her, while Charles sat on a stiff plastic chair, eyes fixed on the door the nurses had taken Caleb through. It had been nearly 40 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. Lena finally stopped pacing. "I should have brought him in sooner. He was coughing last night. I thought it was just the cold." "You did what you could," Charles said gently. "You kept him warm. You watched him closely. That's more than some parents ever do." "But it's not enough," she murmured. "I'm his mother. It's supposed to be my job to protect him." Charles stood slowly and walked over to her. "Being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. And Lena, you show up every single day." Before she could respond, the door opened and a young doctor stepped out. "He's going to be okay," she said, smiling. "Just a case of bronchitis. A strong fever. But we've got it down now. We'll keep him overnight for observation." Lena exhaled so deeply she nearly collapsed. Charles caught her elbow. "Can I see him?" she asked. "Of course." The doctor nodded. Inside, Caleb lay in a small crib, cheeks flushed but eyes open. When he saw Lena, he gave the weakest, sweetest smile she had ever seen. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. Charles stood at the doorway, watching. Something in his chest cracked open even wider. After a moment, Lena turned to him. "Thank you for bringing us here." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Yes, I do," she replied, "because no one else would have come." That night, Charles sat in the waiting room long after visiting hours ended. Nurses offered him coffee, which he accepted but barely touched. He stared at the tiled floor, his mind drifting. He hadn't stepped into a hospital since Meredith and James died. For years, he'd refused even to drive past one. Yet here he was, waiting for a child who wasn't his, worried in a way that made him feel alive again. The next morning, Lena came out, looking exhausted but smiling. "He's sleeping," she said. "They said he might be able to go home this afternoon." Charles hesitated. "And where is home, exactly?" Lena didn't answer right away. She just looked away. He nodded. Come stay at my guest house. Lena blinked. What? It's empty. Warm. Clean. You can stay there until Caleb is better. No strings attached. I don't take charity, she said quietly. This isn't charity, he replied. It's kindness. And maybe a selfish request. I'd just like to know you two are safe. Lena studied him. The man who had once looked like every rich stranger who passed her by now stood before her as something else entirely, present. Real, and willing to offer more than a handout. Just a few days, she said finally, until I figure something out. Charles smiled. Of course. The guest house behind Charles's mansion was more than Lena had ever lived in. Hardwood floors, soft lighting, a real fireplace, and a bed big enough to get lost in. The nursery, once meant for James's future children, had long been covered in sheets. But Charles cleaned it himself. He didn't tell her that part. Lena was careful not to overstep. She kept the space tidy, made her own meals, and insisted Charles let her take Caleb to the clinic appointments alone. Still, Charles found himself drifting toward them, bringing groceries, offering to carry Caleb, staying longer than necessary just to talk. One evening, after dinner, Charles sat in the kitchen while Lena chopped vegetables for soup. Caleb sat in a high chair nearby, giggling each time Charles made a face at him. Did you always want kids? Lena asked suddenly. Charles looked up. Yes. But I only had one. James. She stirred quietly. Was he like you? No, Charles said with a soft smile. He was better. He cared about people. He would have liked you. He wouldn't have hesitated the way I did. You didn't hesitate, she said. I almost did. They were quiet for a while. Then Lena whispered, do you think people like us, people who've been through things, ever get a second chance? Charles didn't answer right away. Then he stood and walked over to Caleb, lifting the boy gently into his arms. I think sometimes, he said, the second chance finds us, even if we didn't ask for it. That weekend, Lena took Caleb for a walk while Charles stayed behind. He stood in his old living room, the one filled with photos and shadows. He looked at a portrait of Meredith and James on the mantel, then slowly added a new one beside it, a picture he'd taken of Lena and Caleb in the park, laughing as ducks swam past. Miriam walked in, stopping in her tracks when she saw the change. She's not family, she said cautiously. She's becoming something close, Charles replied. Miriam nodded slowly. I haven't seen you smile like this in years. I haven't felt like this in years, he admitted. Just then, Lena burst through the front door. Out of breath. Charles, she called. He hurried to the foyer. There's someone outside, she said. He was by the guest house asking questions. Who? I don't know, but he had a clipboard. Said he was from Family and Child Services. Charles frowned. What did he want? He said there'd been a report that someone claimed I wasn't fit to care for Caleb. Charles's eyes hardened. That's ridiculous. Lena looked pale. I don't know who it was. But if they start digging, if they take him, I can't lose him. Charles, you won't, he said firmly. We'll fight it. Together. She searched his face for any sign of doubt. There was none. Then she nodded. Okay, together. And just like that, the second chance they were both afraid to believe in became something else, something worth protecting. The knock came early the next morning. 3 hard raps against the front door of Charles's estate. Charles opened it to find a tall woman with sharp eyes, a government ID around her neck, and a tablet in her hand. Mr. Whitmore? She asked briskly. Yes, I'm Camille Reese, Child Protective Services. I need to speak with the woman currently staying in your guest house. Lena. Charles raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? We received an anonymous report concerning the welfare of the child under her care. I'd prefer to speak with her directly. Charles didn't move. She's still asleep. The child had a fever last night. I suggest you wait. Camille's expression didn't change, but she stepped back slightly. I'll return in an hour. Charles watched her walk away, the wheels in his mind already turning. He closed the door, turned, and found Lena at the top of the staircase. Caleb in her arms, both still in pajamas. I heard her voice, Lena said. Is this real? Yes, she's coming back in an hour. Panic rose in Lena's eyes. They could take him. If they dig far enough. Charles stepped forward. Tell me what they'll find. Lena hesitated, rocking Caleb gently. A record, not a criminal one. Just things I couldn't pay. Eviction notices. Missed appointments. He was born in a shelter. They might say I'm unstable. Charles took a deep breath. But you're not. You're strong. You've kept him safe this long. We just need to prove that. Lena whispered. I can't go back to that life. I can't lose him. Charles. You won't, he said. Camille returned. And this time, Lena met her outside, shoulders squared, voice calm. Caleb balanced on her hip. The meeting lasted nearly an hour. Camille asked questions about routines, safety plans, income. Lena answered each one honestly. Charles watched from a distance, resisting every urge to interrupt. Lena didn't need saving, she needed support. Afterward, Camille approached Charles as she prepared to leave. She's doing better than most, she admitted. The child is healthy, bonded, secure. But this is temporary housing. The concern is what happens if she's asked to leave. She won't be, Charles said. Camille raised an eyebrow. So you're taking responsibility for her living arrangement? I'm offering her stability, he replied, for as long as she needs it. She looked at him a moment longer, then nodded. I'll note that in the file. But we'll continue monitoring the situation. As her car pulled away, Lena approached quietly. That wasn't as bad as I expected. You were impressive, Charles said. You didn't flinch once. I'm tired of flinching, she replied. That afternoon, Charles made a few calls. Lawyers, real estate contacts, even an old friend on the city council. He didn't tell Lena about any of it yet. He wanted to have something solid before making promises. Later, they sat on the back patio. Caleb played on a blanket between them, laughing at a stuffed giraffe Miriam had unearthed from the attic. He loves it here, Lena said softly. Charles nodded. And you? Lena smiled, but it faded. It scares me. Being comfortable, feeling safe, like if I stop worrying, it'll all fall apart. You've lived too long waiting for the next hit, he said gently. She looked up at him. Exactly. Charles leaned back. When Meredith died, I thought feeling safe again was impossible. Then I met you, and that boy. Lena looked surprised. You really think we've changed anything? He chuckled. You've turned my house into a home again. That's no small thing. She blinked, a little stunned. You don't talk about them much. Some days I don't trust myself to say their names without breaking. He admitted, but Caleb reminds me of James. His curiosity, that fearless smile. Lena didn't respond for a moment. Then she reached out and took Charles's hand. He looked down at their joined fingers. It wasn't romantic, it was something deeper. A bond formed in hardship, in choosing each other. That night, as Charles sat by the fireplace reading, Miriam appeared in the doorway, a letter in hand. This came today, she said. He took it and opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a handwritten note. Mr. Whitmore, you don't know me, but I know your guest. She's not who she says she is. Be careful who you trust. No signature. Charles's expression darkened. Miriam, how did this arrive? No postage, she said, just left in the mailbox. He folded the paper, staring into the fire. Someone knew about Lena. Someone didn't want her here. And he was going to find out who. The next morning, Charles sat with Lena on the patio, the letter in his pocket. There's something I need to tell you, she said first. He paused. Go ahead. She took a breath. Before all of this, I was working with someone. A man who promised help but used people like me. Told me to say things. Lie if I had to. He made money off fake charity cases. Said it was the only way to survive. I left when I got pregnant. I ran. Charles said nothing, but his hands tensed slightly. I've been trying to do it right ever since. She continued. I swear to you, I've never lied to you. Not once. I've told you everything that matters. Charles slowly pulled the letter from his pocket and passed it to her. She read it in silence. Her face didn't flinch. When she looked back at him, her eyes were steady. I know what that looks like, she said, but I'm not that girl anymore. Charles studied her, the mother who stayed up with a sick baby, who spoke gently even when terrified, who never asked for anything but a second chance. I believe you, he said. Tears filled her eyes. You do? I've seen who you are now. And that's all that matters to me. They sat in silence for a long while, watching Caleb play in the grass. But Charles's mind was already turning again. If someone from Lena's past was trying to sabotage her future, he wouldn't let it happen. Not again. He had lost too much in his life. He wasn't about to lose this. The following days passed with a strange kind of calm. Caleb's fever broke, and he returned to his usual cheerful self, clapping at birds, babbling at his stuffed giraffe, crawling from one end of the patio to the other like it was a racetrack. Charles and Lena fell into a rhythm, morning coffee together on the porch, Charles retreating to his study while Lena worked on resumes and phone interviews. They shared quiet lunches. Sometimes Lena cooked, which surprised Charles. She was good. Caleb always got the first taste, grinning at every bite. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful. Charles knew it couldn't last. He was already digging. Late at night, long after Lena and Caleb had gone to bed, Charles stayed up at his desk combing through every lead connected to that letter. He asked one of his private investigators, a man named Foster, to look into Lena's past, not because he didn't trust her, but because someone clearly wanted to hurt her, and he needed to know who. 3 days later, Foster called. She's clean, Charles, he said. Couple of minor things, missed court dates, some unpaid bills, but nothing you didn't already know. There is one thing, though. Charles's grip on the phone tightened. Go on. There's a guy named Rick Fulton. Used to run a so-called family outreach nonprofit. It was a scam. Lena was listed in his files. He claimed she was a volunteer. She was probably used as part of his pitch for donations. Thing is, he's out of business, but he still has a few supporters out there. You ticked one off when you started asking questions. Charles stared at the fire crackling in the hearth. Do we know who sent the letter? Not yet, but we're close. Charles hung up, chest tight. Lena had trusted him with the truth. Someone from her past wanted to drag her back through the mud. Not on his watch. The next morning, Lena found him in the garden, tending to a row of potted herbs. You garden now? She teased. Didn't used to. Miriam says it helps with patience. She bent down beside him. Can I ask something? He nodded. Why are you doing all this? For me? For Caleb? He looked at her thoughtfully. Because someone did it for me once. When Meredith and James died, I was a wreck. I nearly lost everything. Business, house, my mind. But my best friend stayed. Sat with me in silence. Cleaned my kitchen. Paid my bills until I could think straight again. He paused. Plucked a weed from the soil. I never paid it forward. Until now. Lena said nothing, but her eyes were full. Later that day, Charles got a call from a name he hadn't heard in years, Elaine Morgan. A board member from one of the charitable foundations he used to support. Charles, she said in that crisp, polite tone of hers, we heard you've taken in a guest. I have. There are rumors that she's dangerous, that she's manipulating you. Is this true? Charles let the silence hang. Then, have you ever met her? No, but then don't speak on what you don't know. Charles, we're just concerned. Elaine, if you're really concerned, maybe start with asking what led her to my doorstep, not why I let her in. He hung up. That evening, he found Lena standing by the window, watching the sunset. Caleb was asleep in the nursery, curled up with his giraffe. I think someone's trying to scare you, Charles said. She didn't look surprised. I felt it, in the way people have been watching. Even the way that woman from CPS asked her questions. It's Rick Fulton's doing, Charles said. He has a few loyalists left. They want to ruin you for leaving him, for exposing him, even unintentionally. Lena clenched her fists. I was 17 when I met him. He promised safety, a home. He said all the right things until I couldn't tell the difference between help and control. Charles stepped closer. You don't owe anyone your silence. Especially not someone who used your pain for profit. She looked at him. What if this gets worse? What if they try to take Caleb again? Then we fight, Charles said. Lena's eyes filled. You'd really stand by me? He didn't hesitate. I already am. The next morning, Miriam greeted them at breakfast with news. There's a man outside. Says his name is Rick Fulton. Wants to speak with Lena. Lena froze. Charles stood immediately. Where? By the gate. Charles turned to Lena. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she said, standing slowly. I'm done running. They walked out together. Rick Fulton was thinner than she remembered, his hair graying, but his smugness hadn't aged a day. Well, he sneered. You look cozy here, trading one savior for another. I'm not here to be saved, Lena replied calmly. He smirked. That old man's got money. Sure, but when the press finds out who you really are, how long do you think he'll keep you around? I already told him everything. Rick's smile faded. Lena took a step closer. You don't scare me anymore. You can send all the letters you want. But I'm not that girl. And you? You're just a bitter man with nothing left to sell. Rick's face reddened, but he said nothing, just turned and walked back to his car, slamming the door hard. Lena stood there, trembling. Charles put a hand on her shoulder. You were brave, he said. I was terrified. Doesn't make it less brave. That night, after Caleb was tucked in and the dishes were done, Charles poured 2 glasses of wine and handed one to Lena. To truth, he said, raising his glass. She clinked hers against his. And to choosing each other. They sat quietly, the fire crackling in the background. In a house once filled with silence, laughter was returning, and Charles realized, maybe this wasn't just about offering someone else a second chance. Maybe it was about finally taking one himself. Summer arrived slowly, as if time itself had decided to stretch out the moments between sunlight and shadow. The garden Charles once kept out of obligation now thrived, basil and thyme lining the walkways. Tomatoes heavy on the vine. Caleb waddled through it daily, barefoot and laughing, his tiny hands always reaching for butterflies and worms with equal delight. Inside the house, things had changed in small but permanent ways. Lena's shoes now sat beside the front door. Her coffee mug, white with a little chip in the handle, had a permanent spot beside Charles's on the kitchen counter. A stack of children's books spilled over on the living room ottoman. And every night, without fail, Caleb's soft humming filled the nursery before he drifted off to sleep. Charles had never planned on becoming a father again, and certainly not a grandfather. Yet here he was, reading bedtime stories, mashing bananas, changing diapers. At first, he thought he was doing it out of duty. Then, maybe, out of guilt. But lately, he knew it was love. One bright Tuesday morning, Lena walked into the living room holding 2 envelopes. One's for you, she said, handing it to Charles. The other is for me. He looked at her curiously. They're from the city's nonprofit council, she explained. I applied for a grant 2 months ago. I want to start a transitional housing program for single mothers. A real one, not like the place Rick ran. Charles opened his envelope. A formal letter, crisp and typed. Lena had listed him as a reference. His brows rose. You called me your mentor? She smiled sheepishly. It was either that or grumpy guardian angel. He chuckled. What about yours? He asked. She opened hers slowly, carefully. Read it once, then again. Her mouth opened in shock. I got it, she whispered. They approved the full amount. I got it, Charles. She rushed over and hugged him before she could think twice. His arms wrapped around her instinctively. I'm so proud of you, he said softly. Tears sprang to her eyes. I couldn't have done it without you. You did most of it without me, he corrected, but I'm glad I got to witness it. That weekend, they held a small celebration in the garden. Miriam made her famous lemon pie. A few local families Lena had met through her community group came by, mothers with strollers, toddlers in mismatched socks, everyone bringing something to share. For the first time in years, Charles saw joy in his home that wasn't haunted by memory. There was music, laughter, finger paint on the patio bricks that no one cared to clean up. Lena made a small speech, nervous at first, but strong as she spoke. I came here with nothing but my son and a spoon in my bag. She said, I thought surviving meant staying invisible. But kindness changed that. A stranger gave me a warm meal, then a place to rest, then a reason to believe again. I want to give that back. Charles stood beside her as she finished, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. Everyone clapped. Caleb squealed and threw a handful of blueberries into the grass. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the stars had come out, Charles and Lena sat quietly on the porch. Your speech was good, he said. I was shaking the whole time. You hid it well. She glanced over. Do you ever think about selling this place? Charles raised an eyebrow. Why? It's beautiful, but maybe too much for one man. Or even 3 people. He looked out at the lawn where the garden lights glowed. I used to think this house was all I had left of Meredith and James. He said, but lately I've been thinking, maybe it was just waiting to have a life in it again. She nodded. I'm not asking you to make decisions tonight, Lena said, smiling. But if this ever stops feeling like a memory, and starts feeling like a future, maybe we build something here. Together. Charles was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I'd like that. Weeks turned into months. Lena's program launched quietly but steadily. Charles donated an old commercial building downtown to serve as its first shelter. She named it New Roots. Caleb started walking, then running, and Charles chased him with surprising energy for a man in his 60s. They made a tradition of having pancakes every Sunday. Lena taught Charles how to use social media. No, don't post that. Caleb's chewing on your watch. And every now and then, Charles found himself smiling just because. One afternoon, Lena walked into his study holding a framed photo. I had this printed, she said. It was a candid shot Miriam had taken. Charles. Caleb on his shoulders. Lena beside them laughing. Charles stared at it, throat thick. You okay? She asked. He nodded. It's just been a long time since I looked at a picture and saw a future instead of what I lost. She set it on the desk. Then keep it close. You've earned that. That evening, the 3 of them stood at the edge of the garden, watching the sky bleed orange and pink. Lena took Charles's hand on one side, Caleb holding his other. The wind was soft. The silence was warm. And in that simple, fleeting moment, Charles Whitmore, once the loneliest man in the city, knew without a doubt. He was home. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe to Tell Night. At Tell Night, stories remind us that healing begins with hope, and even the gentlest kindness can rewrite a destiny. Don't forget to tap the bell so you never miss a story that could brighten your day or transform your perspective. Until our next story, keep your heart open and your spirit brave.